Hey, good morning, North Shore. My name is Stan. I'm one of the pastors here. The one delayed woohoo, I'll take it. That's the appropriate level of excitement for me to be here. Well, anyway, I'm here regardless, and I get to take us deeper into our Proverbs series that Wolfgang kicked us off with last week, where we are looking at God's wisdom for our life and how if we ignore it, we run the risk of wrecking our lives. And as I was thinking about Proverbs and wisdom and all of that kind of stuff, I started to think about life hacks. So it's probably something we're all familiar with, but just in case, I'll explain it. I think what they're supposed to be is a non-obvious solution to a problem that you have. So if you're painting a room and you're concerned about the fumes, you can put a tablespoon of vanilla in your paint, and supposedly that will deal with the fumes. I don't know. Some people are like, oh, I never knew that. We're learning something already. Another thing that I saw was that if you've got a bunch of unripe fruit, you can store it with a banana, and supposedly that will ripen the fruit faster. I don't know how it works. I'm not a scientist. I went to Bible school, so I have no information on the mechanics of that. But if you go down the life hack rabbit hole, you'll start to see that they become more and more absurd. So I saw one where a lady suggested wrapping your head in saran wrap and then smearing peanut butter all over the face, so that way when you need to cut your dog's nails, he'll be distracted by licking the peanut butter. Which, I don't know how you see through the peanut butter, but this was her system. Or I found this life hack a day calendar, so I'm gonna read you the hack. How to easily calculate a 20% tip. Take the total cost of the bill and move the decimal one place to the left, double that number to get your 20% tip. You lost me at decimal. I have no idea how this calculation works. The life hack should have been your phone has a calculator, right? That's the easiest solution. All the engineers in the room were like, what was confusing about that? It made perfect sense to them. But there's a guy who is a TikTok creator, which is a profession apparently. His name is Kabi Lame. I hope I'm saying that right. And he has made a career out of just making fun of really absurd life hacks. He's got 8 of the top 10 most viewed TikTok videos. So I want to show you one of his creations. You get paid millions of dollars to come up with stuff like that. So, Proverbs, which is where we're going to be this morning, is in one sense kind of like the Bible's life hack section because it's very practical, but it's also not life hacks in the absurdity sort of way. Last week, Wolfgang gave us a definition of wisdom that was having skill in living, knowing what to do and how to do it and the way to implement it into our lives. And Proverbs has wisdom for every part of life, every situation, everything you're going to deal with. Proverbs has something to say about it. And this morning, we're going to jump into what Proverbs has to say about friendship. And before we get into the actual Proverbs about friendship, I actually want to expand our meaning of wisdom. I want to understand wisdom a little bit more. Because when you start to read the Proverbs, you'll see that they're very straightforward. They're very practical. It's very obvious to see what you're supposed to do. But why we should do it really is rooted in our understanding of wisdom. So I just want to build on our understanding of that a little bit more. And I don't really have one passage that we're going to be in this morning, so all the verses will be on the screen so you can follow along. But this is Proverbs 3:13 through 18. Let me read it for you. Blessed is the one who has found wisdom and the one who obtains understanding. For her benefit is more profitable than silver, and her gain is better than gold. She is more precious than rubies, and none of the things that you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant, and all her paths are peaceful. She is like a tree of life to those who grasp onto her, and everyone who takes hold of her will be blessed. So last week, Wolfgang also looked at this passage, and he looked at verses 14 through 17. And so if you missed that, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to those. I want to just focus in on two details from verses 13 and 18. So I've kind of bookended them together so you can see, and just highlighted the two words I want you to see. So the first word is our word wisdom, and then our second is our tree of life phrase. So this word wisdom, I'm going to teach you a Hebrew word. If we could bring that up. This word is chokmah. Chokmah. So the CH and the KM make a throat clearing sound. That's how it's done in Hebrew. So I want everyone to say that with me. Chokmah. You got to get the throat clearing in there. It doesn't count. So one more time. Chokmah. Okay. So chokmah is the word that we're translating into English as wisdom. And like Wolfgang gave us a definition last week, wisdom is having skill in living. So Hebrew is more of a conceptual language where it can have multiple meanings at once. It can have multiple ideas in the word at the same time. So chokmah does have that skill in living component, but it also has this idea with it that there is kind of a logic to our world. There is a way things are supposed to go that God has embedded into our world. There's kind of like a DNA level of thing that is going on here where there are certain paths that God blesses and certain paths that God doesn't bless or he frustrates. There are certain things that lead to life and certain things that lead to destruction. There's just kind of this DNA, destiny sort of thing that God has put into our world, and that's what chokmah is trying to convey, is that there is something about this universe that given enough time, God's desires for it, God's plans for it, God's way of life will happen. And there's a famous Martin Luther King Jr. quote that has a similar idea to it, but I think it will help clarify what I'm saying. So it says this: "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." What he means by that is he's saying, eventually justice does win out. And that's kind of the same sort of principle that we see in chokmah. Eventually God's wisdom for our lives does come to fruition. That is how things are supposed to be. The other thing, if we go back to those 13 and 18 verses, is he says wisdom is like a tree of life. And what the author here is trying to do is he's trying to bring back up for us the Genesis narrative, the original creation narrative. And if you know the story, God makes Adam and Eve and he puts them in the Garden of Eden. And it's this place where everything is perfect and harmonious, and God provides for everything, and they never have to worry about anything, and there's no suffering, and there's no pain. It's how life is intended to be. And it says this in Genesis 2:9. "The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow from the soil, every tree that was pleasing to look at and good for food. Now the tree of life and the tree of knowledge and good and evil were in the middle of the garden." Or in the orchard. These two trees represented two different paths of life. There was a tree of knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve could eat of that was about being wise in your own eyes and taking control of your own life. And it led to destruction. It led to pain. It led to exile. It led to being outside of that harmonious state that God had for them. But then there was the tree of life, and that was living by God's wisdom. And it was going to lead to more life and more of Eden and the expansion of Eden into larger places. And so what the author of Proverbs is trying to do, he's trying to say, wisdom is like getting the experience to live like you're in Eden again, or to live Eden's ways again, to bring back that sort of way of life. Or another way you could think about it is, it's saying, hey, if we were still in Eden, this is how we would do life. This is how things are supposed to be. This is God's designs for this world. And so that's really what Proverbs is going to put before us. And so when we look at our friendships, we're really looking at how do we have Eden-type friendships? And if we ignore God's desires for friendships, we run the risk of wrecking our lives. So I've got an assortment of verses from Proverbs on friendship that I'm going to read you. We'll just go through these all at once. This is Proverbs 13:20. "The one who associates with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm." Or Proverbs 18:24. "There are companions who harm one another, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Proverbs 27:17. "As iron sharpens iron, so a person sharpens his friend." And then lastly, Proverbs chapter 22, verses 24 and 25. "Do not make friends with an angry person, and do not associate with a wrathful person, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare." This is just a sampling of what's in Proverbs about friendship, but you kind of see that the underlying principle is we have to be careful about who we surround ourselves with, who we make friendships with, because they have the potential to affect and shape us. And so he says, if you surround yourself with wise people, you'll become wise. If you surround yourself with committed people, when bad things happen, you'll have the support you need. If you have the right people in your life, there's probably still going to be friction, but even in that friction, it's actually good friction. You're actually sharpening one another. But the converse is true too. If you surround yourself with fools or wrathful people, you'll actually find yourself becoming like the fools or like the wrathful people. Or if you surround yourself with friends, that are actually more biting and more caustic in their treatment of you, well, what happens when something bad happens? You don't actually really have anybody to support you. And not every relationship friction is actually good friction. Actually, some friction is bad for both people involved. And so last week, Wolfgang introduced us to a man named Solomon, and his son's story is actually kind of a narrative example of everything that Proverbs is saying. So this is in 1 Kings 12. I'm just going to tell you the story, but if you want to read it on your own, you can see it in 1 Kings 12. But it's a narrative example of everything Proverbs just said. So Solomon passes away, and his son Rehoboam takes over. And right when he takes over, the people come to him on his inauguration day and ask him, what kind of king are you going to be? What kind of king are you going to be? And they say to him, Solomon was actually a really hard king for us. He worked us hard, he was burdensome, he taxed us a lot, and it just was a lot. And we're asking you to lighten the burdens, make it easier on us, tax us less. And if you do that, we'll be loyal to you forever. We will be committed to you forever. We will love having you as our king. So he hears that, and he goes, well, let me go ask my dad's friends what they think. And it says he goes to the older wise men that were his dad's friends. And he says, hey, this is what the people said about my dad. What do you guys think? What should I do? And the older guys go, the people are right. Your dad was a hard guy. He did tax them a lot. He did put a lot on them. And if you go about being king and you see yourself as a steward, and you see yourself as a person who's here to serve the people and be there for the people and listen to their concerns and needs and provide for them, they will be loyal to you, they will love you, they will be committed to you, they will serve you. I was okay. And then he says, I wonder what my friends think. So it says he goes to the young men who he grew up with. And he says, hey, this is what the people are saying. This is what my dad's friends are saying. What do you guys think? And his friends go, well, those people are idiots. What you need to do, mind you, these are young people who don't know anything. They go, what you need to do is you need to tell those people, look, you think my dad was bad? Just wait till you see me. I am going to tax you so much. I am going to crush your spirits. I'm going to lay the burdens on you. You thought Solomon was bad? Just wait till you see me. And he hears that advice, and he goes, yeah, that sounds like good advice. And so he goes to the people and tells them that, and he really buys into this Machiavellian, it's better to be or a rule by fear sort of thing. And the people just go, all right, we're out. We don't want to have you as our king anymore. What he needed to do is he needed to buy into a Michael Scott, I want them to be afraid of how much they love me sort of dynamic, and be there for the people. And what ends up happening is the story is the nation splits and 10 tribes go away and 2 stay with Rehoboam and all these different things. And that's a whole separate story. But the illustrative point is that he really had a tree of life decision put before him. He could have surrounded himself he did surround himself with 2 types of people. And if he had listened to the wise people, he would have had his kingdom, he would have had an Eden-like experience for him and the people, but instead he surrounded himself with the fools and listened to them, and it just led to destruction for everyone. And so we have to be careful about who we surround ourselves with, who we allow to shape and affect us. And so what Proverbs is trying to do is get us to ask those types of questions. What influences do I have? Who is close to me? Who is a person that I have in my life? Do I need boundaries? But it also invites us to think about it from the friendship standpoint, or the being the friend side of it, where we go, well, who am I to others? Am I a person who makes others wise? Am I a supportive person? Am I a person who brings good friction into these relationships? And we have to just ask these types of questions because who we have around us will shape and affect us. That's the wisdom of Proverbs. And I was a youth pastor for a long time before I was the group's pastor here. And so when you work with adolescents, you get to see this kind of dynamic front and center in kids' lives, right? You see if you have a kid come into youth group and they're one way and they get a different group of friends and all of a sudden they're dressing differently and their music taste changes and what they're interested in. And a lot of that's trivial. I mean, if we could find some pictures of me from high school, there would be a lot of emo bangs and there would be a lot of sad music that I was listening to and skinny jeans and all these things that my friends were really into because that was how you fit into the friend group. And that's trivial. But other times, it can really have some higher stakes, right? There are kids who enter into relationships with people who end up bringing them down and set a course and trajectory of their life that's not healthy for them. But there are also kids who find their people who are supportive and are there for them and help them elevate into what God has for them. And so it's tree of life. Like, which path do you want to choose? And I think as adults, we think, well, that's really something you deal with in your adolescence. It's not really something you have to deal with as an adult, but it's still true for us well into all stages of life. And so I want to share with you something called the Ash line study. So I'm going to read it for you. Which line is the same line as the line on the left? This is the original line. Raise your hand if you think it's A. Okay, this is not a trick question. You should all have your hands up. A is actually correct. Okay, so what the study was, though, is they would take 8 people, and they would bring them into the room, and they would show them this. But they would take 7 of the people first, and they would say, hey, when we ask the question, I want you to say C. I want you to say the one that's obviously wrong. And then we're going to see what the last person does. We're going to see if they conform to what everybody else said, or if they'll say what's actually right. And 75% of the time, the person conforms to the wrong answer because everybody else said it first, which seems like a lot, right? Like, that seems really high, but just is an indicator of how much our people that are around us can shape how we act. But then they do the study again, and they again bring in 8 people, and 6 of them, they say the wrong answer. And then they say to the 7th person, hey, we want you to say the right answer, and we'll see what the person does. And as soon as that person had one supportive person in the group with them, the likelihood, they were only saying the wrong answer 5% of the time, right? Complete invert, like having a supportive person with you, having a person who you knew was in it with you, just changed the whole dynamic. And this is just a common grace example of how this is just evidencing what Proverbs is saying. And so we have to think about, okay, like, who is around us? Because there can be high costs to it. Negatively speaking, in recent years, there's been more of a spotlight on toxicity and toxic communities and workplaces and maybe churches and institutions and things like that. And one of the interesting things that will come out in those stories is the people who entered in and then by being in those environments became toxic themselves. Like, they conformed to the pattern of what was okay in that environment around them. And so there can be a cost. But it can also work positively. If you think of something like a recovery group, where an AA and NA, something like that, you take a person who's on the road to recovery, and you give them people who are empathetic, who are sympathetic, who are supportive, who are not there to pretend or have any pretense, but are just honest about what's going on, who are a little bit further down the line than them. And that person can find community, and they can find a group for them. Well, they can find wholeness, and they can find healing, and they can find recovery, right? The people that surround them actually support them on the journey. Our relationships that we have just have this transformative potential depending on who's in the relationship. So let me just share you an example from my life. So I'm from California, and I lived in California my whole life, and then in 2010, I decided to take a job, an internship in Toledo, Ohio. So there are some reasons why that was going to be difficult. One being the job ended up being different than I thought it was going to be. Another being I had been working at one church, and I'm moving to a different church, and there were some kind of ethical things going on, non-ethical things, I guess would be the way of saying that. My previous church that I felt like, I can't stay here now. So your kind of spiritual framework is changing, and I'm moving to an area where I don't know anyone. And then I had only seen snow 2 times in my life, right? It's just not something that I live near the beach. It's 75 every day. Snow was a thing that you went and saw, and you're like, oh, great, I'm glad we don't have to deal with this. And then we just go, And then you move to Ohio, and it's like, oh, we're still doing this snow thing, huh? We're still doing it another month. All right, well, that's what we're doing. So anyway, potential for a lot of hardship in that transition. And when I got there, I ended up making a close friend who were brother and sister, and they had a family night on Friday nights, and they just were really intentional to bring me into their family's family night, and that family was really intentional to accept me in, and I would do my holidays with them, and all these different things. And it just became this really supportive, great environment for me. So I haven't lived in Ohio in 10 years now, but Ohio still feels like home to me in a lot of ways. It still has this just homeliness to it, or hominess to it, because of who the people were and how they supported me and how they were there for me. And that was just a really beautiful, what could have been a high difficulty scenario was actually a very beautiful scenario, and it's because of the people involved. And Proverbs is just trying to get us to think through our relationships and align them to Eden's way of life. And so we have to think about who's in our lives, what boundaries do we need, all that sort of stuff. But all of those questions are complex, and it's hard to know how to navigate them, and who are the right people, and that sort of thing. And so because of that, we actually have one other resource that's available to us, and that's Jesus. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is the perfect embodiment of wisdom. He's the perfect embodiment of Chokmah. He's always living the way that God intends. And so Jesus is not just morally perfect, Jesus is also relationally perfect. Jesus is not just morally perfect, Jesus is also relationally perfect. He's always making the right choice. He's always doing it the Eden way. He's always displaying skill in wisdom, skill in living. So when you see Jesus interact with people, he always gives the right balance of firmness and empathy. Or he knows when it's time to show compassion and when it's time to give someone a strong word. Or he knows when it's time to engage in the argument or retreat from the argument and disengage from it. And he knows how to pick the right balance of relationship time, task time, and rest time. He just is always living in perfect balance of those things. And he spends the right time knowing how to be in ministry and how to fill himself up, and the right balance of truth and grace with people. And I just highlight those as examples because I think those are things where we really struggle to know the right balance on those kind of binaries or those kinds of equations. Times where we think the best thing to do right now is to get the task done, when really the best thing to do was to be present and relationally available to someone. Or time where we think, this person needs a problem solver. This person needs someone to just fix what they've got going on. And really, they just needed someone to listen to them. Or times where we thought, oh, that person really needs, a smack of truth. And really what they needed, what Chokmah would have been, was to give them grace. And trying to find the right balance of those things. And I highlight those as examples because those are areas where I just consistently don't make the right choice. Or I just don't always land on the right side of the equation. So, just another example from my life. So I like to cook. That's probably my main hobby. And we as a family enjoy hospitality, having people over and that sort of thing. But when I'm in the kitchen, my wife will tell you, I am an annoying person to share a kitchen with. I am not hospitable in that moment. I am just too task-oriented, and I end up in the effort to do something nice for someone, I end up being mean to the person in the process because I'm just trying to get this done. Okay, yeah, we can have time to hang out later. Let me finish this. And what I'm saying is, if I invite you over, don't show up early. But no. Really what I'm saying is, I have to understand how Jesus would be in those situations and saturate my mind with his mind so that way I am like him in those situations. There's room for me still to grow in those. And the only way I'm going to know how to grow is to turn to Jesus. The only way I'm going to know how to be the right balance of truth and grace or the right balance of problem solving versus listening is to really reflect what Jesus is like. And there's this reciprocal dynamic in knowing Jesus where we start by asking, what would Jesus do? But then by knowing him so well and saturating our minds with him, we then get the opportunity to ask, well, what would Jesus do if he was me, if he was placed in my situation and where I'm at right now? What would he do if he was in my friend group or my family of origin? Or what would he do in my workplace or my neighborhood or my school? Or if he faced the pressures that I faced, or if he was in the economic situation that I was in, or all of those types of questions. And as we start to know Jesus, we know, oh, this is how he would be in those places. And as we start to be like him in those places, we start to experience Eden because we are living by Chokmah. So I want to show you one last thing before we close out. And this is Jesus with his closest friends. This is him with the disciples. This is Luke 6, verses 13 through 15. When morning came, he called his disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon who was called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot who became the traitor. So in this collection of people, we got a lot of different types of people. We got the fishermen who are kind of the uneducated folk, and then we've got Matthew, who is he's a tax collector, not necessarily known for being the most scrupulous person, probably in all likelihood has stolen from people, maybe even stolen from some of these people. But by being a tax collector, he's a Roman official. He's showing loyalty to Rome, would have been seen as a traitor to everybody else. And then we've got Simon the Zealot. And the Zealots were this subculture who they wanted to overthrow Rome, and they had committed themselves to starting a rebellion with Rome. They thought, if we force God's hand with a war, God will deliver us. And then you've got Judas Iscariot. And his last name is not Iscariot because they did not have last names back then. And it just would be really unlucky to invent the last name and also kill the Messiah. Like, no one's going to remember that former accomplishment. But what Iscariot could mean is it can mean one of two things. It can either mean some sort of like indicator of like what town he's from, or it could be a derivative of the word Sicarii. And the Sicarii were the suicide bombers of the Zealots. What they would do is they would always have a dagger on them, and they were committed to, if they ever saw a vulnerable Roman official, they would kill them. They would stab them. That was what they had taken a life oath to do those sorts of things. So when Jesus goes to Matthew and is like, man, I think you're going to really like it here. We got a great group of guys for you to be part of. 11 of them probably hate you. One of them might have a life oath to kill you. This does not seem like a good environment, right? It seems actually more like a time bomb. And so how can we say Jesus is living out Chokmah? Like, this doesn't seem like the type of people to make you wise. This doesn't seem like a supportive environment. This seems like something ready to explode. And the reason it's Chokmah is because of how Jesus radically changes all of our relationships. Part of committing to Jesus means that when we commit to him, he commits us to everybody else that's following him. He puts us in this dynamic where our relationship with him changes all of our other relationships. And he puts us in this family dynamic with all of these other people who love him as well. And he says, hey, we're going to reorganize our relationships. We're all going to be together. And in this family bond, we're going to work this stuff out. We're going to figure things out. We're going to navigate the tensions. We're going to show grace and humility and kindness to one another. And we're going to figure out how to do this. And as we figure out how to do this, we will find Eden together because we're family. And this is the DNA of Chokmah at work. Our intuition would say people who don't get along or don't think the same can't be around each other. You actually need to go into an echo chamber. You have to be around people who think like you, look like you, act like you, deal with all the things that you're dealing with, and being around people who are different than you is just going to be a challenge. And Jesus says, no, we need to surround ourselves with people who are different than us, and in working through the difference, in working through the challenges, in working through them in the ways that he operated, we actually create Eden here on earth. And so then what we end up finding is that we are now surrounded with the people who are there to make us wise. We are now surrounded with the people who are there to be the support when we need it. We're now surrounded with the people who, there'll be friction, but we'll be better together because we're family in Jesus. Which brings us to the act of communion. And communion is this moment where we commemorate Jesus' death for us. We recognize his body broken for us, his blood shed for us. But it's also this communal moment, this moment where it's all of us together who have shared in that grace, recognizing we're in this together. And so in this room, we have people who are online and people who are here in person, or in this church, I should say. We have people who are from different communities, different stages of life, different economic backgrounds, different ideologies, different ethnic backgrounds. We may even have people who at one point were bonded together but have some sort of difference between them right now, keeping them apart. But we are all still family. We are all still one together because we have Jesus. And so in a moment, we're going to take communion together to commemorate that. But before we take it, what I'd like to do is I'd like to read a blessing over you. This is Eugene Peterson's Ephesians 4 paraphrase. So if you would just indulge me for a moment, if you just close your eyes and place your hands out as a symbolic gesture of receiving the blessing. It says this: in light of all this, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out there and walk. Better yet, run. Run on the road that God called you to travel. Not in fits and starts, but steadily pouring yourselves out for each other in acts of love, alert at noticing differences and quick at mending fences. You are all called to travel on the same road, in the same direction. So stay together, both outwardly and inwardly. You have one master, one faith, one baptism, one God, and Father of all, who rules over all, who works through all, and is present in all. Everything you are and think and do is permeated with oneness. If you would grab your communion elements, we have the bread and the juice. The bread is gluten-free if that's a concern for you. But let us take this together as a way of commemorating what Jesus did for us and how we are together because of that. This is from Matthew's recording in Matthew 26. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took the bread and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Let's take the bread. And then Jesus said, and he took the cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of it again, of the fruit of the vine, until that day when I drink it new with you in the Father's kingdom." Let's take the cup. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for who you are, what you've done for us, how we are together because of who we are in you, Lord. We pray that each of us would be willing to live out the chokmah that you have for our lives, that we would be willing to eat of that tree of life, that we would live in unity and reconciliation and working together what it means to be family together, Lord. We pray that your Spirit would be stirring in each of our lives how to apply this and where to know how to be like you in the areas that you've placed us. In your name, amen.
Hey, thanks so much for watching.
Please be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content.
Yep, and click right here for more content we think you might like.
Seriously,
Click it.
do it right now. Show them again, Kiki.